The containment lab on the orbital station Aesthetic Grace hummed with the sound of 1,000 magnetic dampeners working in unison. It was a sound usually reserved for containing unstable antimatter cores or collapsing microsingularities. Today, however, the dampeners were focused on a single slab of biofoam in the center of the isolation ward. High Examiner Threx smoothed the feathers along his forearms, his chitinous beak clicking nervously against his data slate. He was a Xanid, a species evolved in the low-gravity, high-oxygen canopy of a Class II garden world. His bones were hollow lattices of silica and air, elegant and fragile. He stood 2 meters tall but weighed less than 30 standard kilograms. To him, the creature behind the quintuple-reinforced hyperglass was a physical impossibility. Atmospheric pressure stabilized at 400% galactic standard, the automated system chimed, its voice sterile and calm. Gravity localized to 98 meters per second squared within the containment field. Threx shuddered, 98 ms2. It was a crushing, oppressive force. If Threx were to step into that field, his internal organs would liquefy, and his skeleton would shatter under his own weight. Yet the creature inside the field lay there, chest rising and falling in a slow, terrifyingly rhythmic slumber. Examiner, whispered junior researcher Kix, her compound eyes shimmering with a mixture of scientific curiosity and primal dread. She pointed a trembling claw at the holographic readout hovering above the control console. Look at the skeletal density readings, the sensors. They must be malfunctioning. Threx leaned in, his ocular implants zooming on the data stream. He felt the blood drain from his crest. Recalibrate the scanners, Kix. This says the subject's internal structure is composed of, by the void, calcium phosphate composites with a density rivalry industrial starship plating. I have recalibrated 3 times, Examiner, Kix squeaked, her voice dropping an octave in fear. It is not an error. The subject's skeletal structure is designed to withstand constant kinetic impact. It is a solid, calcified cage, and the muscular fibers. She tapped a command, bringing up a cross-section of the sleeping creature's arm. The hologram displayed a dense, red weave of tissue. Type EX fast-twitch fibers, Threx muttered, reading the chemical analysis. But look at the energy potential stored in the cells. The mitochondria count is absurd. This isn't a biological organism, Kix. It's a combustion engine wrapped in meat. They looked through the glass. The creature, a human, according to the recovered data from the wreckage of its primitive escape pod, was relatively small. It lacked claws. It lacked an exoskeleton. It had no venom sacs visible on the neck. It looked soft, covered in pale, pinkish skin that seemed to bruise if one looked at it too hard. But the scans painted a picture of a monster born of a hellscape. Class 12, Threx whispered, the classification tasting like ash in his beak. The Council archives call them Deathworlds, but that is a theoretical limit. High gravity, unstable tectonic activity, solar radiation levels that would strip the DNA from a Xanid in seconds, and this thing, it evolved there. It didn't just evolve there, Examiner, Kix said, scrolling through the atmospheric analysis of the creature's pod. It thrived. Look at the atmospheric mix it was breathing. 78% nitrogen, 21% oxygen. Threx gasped. Oxygen is a corrosive. At that concentration, it would burn the lungs out of a standard life form. It's creating a controlled oxidation fire inside its own chest just to power those muscles. Suddenly, the bio readout spiked. A jagged red line shot upward on the heart rate monitor. Thump, thump. The sound was audible even through the hyperglass. It wasn't the fluttery, rapid beat of a Xanid heart. It was a slow, hydraulic pounding, like a pile driver hitting wet earth. Thump, thump. Subject is regaining consciousness, the computer announced. Increase the sedation. Threx screeched, his feathers puffing out in panic. Keep it under. I can't. Kix frantically tapped at the console. Its metabolism is chewing through the sedatives faster than we can synthesize them. The liver function. By the stars, its liver is breaking down Class 5 neurotoxins as if they were mild nutrients. Inside the chamber, the human shifted. To Council species, movement was usually fluid, graceful, utilizing the path of least resistance. The human did not move like that. It twitched. A hand, heavy and thick with calluses, clenched into a fist. The tendons stood out against the wrist like braided steel cables. The creature's eyes opened. Threx froze. He had expected the black, soulless void of a predator or the multifaceted confusion of prey. Instead, he saw white spheres with contracting irises of predatory blue. They were wet, scanning, darting with a speed that suggested the creature's brain was processing visual data at combat speeds. The human sat up. It didn't use the hydraulic lift of the bed. It didn't roll to the side to leverage its center of mass. It simply hinged at the waist, the abdominal muscles contracting with enough force to snap a Xanid spine, and pulled its heavy, dense torso upright against the crushing 9.8 gs of gravity as if it were nothing. As if gravity were merely a suggestion it chose to ignore. The creature looked around the room, its gaze finally locking onto the observation window where Threx and Kix stood. "It sees us," Kix whimpered, stepping back. The human opened its mouth. Threx braced himself for a roar, a screech, something intelligible. Instead, a low, rumbling vibration emanated from the creature's throat. It was deep, resonating in the infrasound spectrum. Threx felt it in his hollow bones. It was a sound of geological grinding. Where? The creature croaked, the sound waves vibrating the very air in the observation deck. "Where is the coffee?" Translation, Threx demanded, his voice trembling. "The translator is struggling with the dialect," the computer replied. "It is requesting a chemical stimulant. Specifically, a solution of hot water and caffeine." Caffeine, Threx stared at the readout. "That is a Class A neuroinsecticide. It causes cardiac arrest in 90% of known species." The human, seemingly displeased by the lack of response, swung its legs over the side of the biofoam slab. Its bare feet hit the metal floor. Clang. It wasn't a soft patter. It was the sound of a heavy object striking the deck. The creature stood, its spine uncoiling. It stretched, extending its arms upward. A sickening series of asterisk pops and cracks echoed through the audio feed. "Structural failure in the subject," Kix cried out. "It's breaking its own skeleton." "No," Threx realized with dawning horror watching the readout. "It's realigning. It is voluntarily dislocating and relocating its joints to relieve pressure. It finds the act pleasurable." The human rolled its neck, another terrifying asterisk crack asterisk, and stepped toward the glass. It moved with a terrifying predatory gait. Every step was a controlled fall, caught by the massive quadriceps muscles. It was an apex persistence predator, built not for speed but to walk things to death. It stopped inches from the hyperglass. The barrier was designed to withstand the impact of a micrometeorite. The human raised a hand and placed it against the transparent surface. Threx watched, mesmerized, as the skin on the human's palm flattened. He could see the microabrasions, the scars of a life lived in a hostile environment. He saw the moisture sweat. "Warning," the computer chimed. "Biohazard detected. The subject is secreting a saline solution containing urea, lactate, and diverse bacterial colonies." "It's leaking," Kix gagged. "It's cooling," Threx corrected, his scientific mind racing to keep up with the horror. "It uses evaporative cooling. It can run until its prey dies of heat stroke while it remains thermally stable." The human leaned forward, its breath fogging the glass. The condensation carried a bacterial load that could wipe out the entire station's crew if the seal was breached. "Hey," the human said, louder this time. The volume was shocking. "I know you're back there. I can hear your heartbeats. They sound like hummingbirds." Threx stopped breathing. The soundproofing between the isolation ward and the observation deck was absolute, or it was supposed to be. "You," Threx pressed the intercom button, his claw shaking. "You can hear us." The human's lips peeled back, revealing 2 rows of calcium phosphate grinders, including 4 distinct tearing canines. It was a gesture the translator identified as a smile, but Threx knew a threat display when he saw one. "I can hear the electricity in the walls, buddy," the human rumbled. It tapped the glass with a single finger, tink, tink. The sound was sharp, hard. "This is a nice zoo," the human said, the vibration of its voice causing a ripple in Threx's drink on the console. "But the gravity is a little low. I feel lightheaded." "Can you turn it up?" Threx stared at Kix. They were already at a crushing 9.8 gs. "Subject," Threx stammered into the mic. "The gravity is set to your planetary standard. Increasing it might cause internal hemorrhage." The human laughed. It was a barking, chaotic sound. "Standard. I'm from the colonies on Jupiter's 4th moon. I train at 1.5 Earth standard. I feel like a balloon in here, and if you don't open this door." The human leaned closer, the blue eyes darkening, the pupils dilated, adrenaline flooding its system. The biomonitors screamed as the creature's blood pressure spiked to levels that should have burst its arteries. "I'm going to walk through it." The human placed both hands on the hyperglass. The biceps bulged, the fibers bunching up like coiled pythons. Threx watched the stress gauges on the containment field. Structural integrity, 99%, 98%, 95%. The human wasn't punching, it wasn't striking, it was pushing. It was applying steady, unrelenting torque. The friction of its skin against the glass squealed. It's generating 4,000 newtons of force, Kix screamed. From a standing start without leverage, crack. A spiderweb fracture appeared in the center of the hyperglass, directly under the human's palm. Threx felt his knees give way. The glass was made of diamond lattice polycarbonate. It was impossible. The human looked at the crack, then back at Threx. The smile widened, predatory and assured. "Open the door," the Deathworlder said softly, "or I'll huff and I'll puff." Threx didn't know the rest of the idiom, but he knew the laws of physics, and he knew they were currently being strangled by the creature on the other side of the glass. "Open it," Threx whispered. "Open it before it kills us all." Kix's manipulator claws were a blur of panic-induced motion, skittering across the holographic interface like terrified arachnids. The containment protocols were complex, a 12-step verification process designed to prevent accidental releases of Class 4 predators. But the creature behind the glass, the Deathworlder, did not operate on Class 4 timescales. "I am bypassing the safety interlocks," Kix squealed, his vocal synthesizer pitching up into the ultrasonic range. "The release cycle requires a nitrogen flush. If I open it now, the atmosphere inside will mix with ours. Do it." Threx roared, though his own voice was little more than a dry rasp. "The glass is failing, Kix. Look at the stress distribution." On the monitor, the spiderweb fracture under the human's palm expanded. It wasn't a shatter, it was a slow, agonizing yield. The diamond lattice was behaving like putty under the relentless hydraulic pressure of the primate's musculature. The human wasn't just strong, its bone density was so high that its skeletal structure acted as a rigid fulcrum, allowing it to transfer force with 99.8% biomechanical efficiency. Hiss thunk. The heavy magnetic clamps of the airlock disengaged. The sound was deafening in the sterile silence of the observation deck, a heavy industrial clank that vibrated through the floor plates. The human stepped back as the massive slab of hyperglass slid aside. Immediately, the sensors on Threx's console lit up in a riot of red warnings: atmospheric contamination, pheromone overload, thermal spike. The creature stepped across the threshold. Threx instinctively recoiled, pushing his hoverchair back until it struck the rear bulkhead. The physical presence of the human was overwhelming. Through the glass, it had been a specimen. In the open air, it was a catastrophe of evolution. The first thing that hit Threx was the heat. Council species were generally poikilothermic or maintained low metabolic rates to conserve energy in the void. The human was a furnace. It radiated infrared energy in waves, heating the air around it. Threx could feel the warmth on his chitin from 5 meters away, a dry, oppressive heat generated by a metabolism that burned through calories at a rate that would starve a Glycekin in an hour. "Better," the human sighed. The voice was unamplified now, stripped of the intercom's filtering. It was a rich, baritone rumble that Threx felt in his subdermal fluid sacs. The sheer acoustic power required to produce that sound implied a lung capacity and diaphragm strength that was frankly obscene. The human stretched, raising its arms above its head, the fabric of its orange containment suit strained, the synthetic fibers groaning. "Gravity is still trash, though," the human muttered. It looked down at its boots. "I feel like I'm walking on a bouncy castle." Threx's 3 eyes widened. The observation deck was kept at 0.8 galactic standard gravity, comfortable for the spindly, hollow-boned researchers of the Council. For a creature evolved on a Class 12 Deathworld and further hardened by the crushing gravity of a Jovian supermoon, this environment offered effectively zero resistance. The human took a step. It was too fast, used to fighting 1.5 gs of downforce. The human's neuromuscular system overcompensated. It launched forward, covering the distance to the main console in a blur of motion that Threx's optical processors struggled to track. It didn't walk, it glided, a apex predator moving with the frictionless grace of a kinetic kill vehicle. It stopped at the console, leaning a hip against the plasteel edge. The metal creaked ominously under the dense mass. "So," the human said, looking down at Kix. The small, multi-limbed alien was curled into a ball of submission beneath the desk. "You're the ones who fished my shuttle out of the wreck," Kix whimpered. We performed a rescue extraction," Threx managed to say, his translator lagging as it tried to parse the terrifying levels of cortisol flooding his own brain. "According to the Galactic Charter, Section 4, Paragraph, you put me in a zoo," the human interrupted. It wasn't a question. The creature's binocular eyes, predator eyes, forward-facing for depth perception and tracking prey, locked onto Threx. The irises were a turbulent shade of blue, shifting like the violent oceans of their homeworld. Quarantine, Threx corrected, desperate to justify the violation. Standard protocol for high-risk biological entities. We didn't know. Didn't know what, that you were, this. Threx gestured vaguely at the human's entire form. The human snorted. It reached out and picked up a datapad from the desk. The device, designed for the delicate, tactile manipulators of the Salarian intelligences, looked like a toy in the human's thick, scarred fingers. Threx watched in horror as the human's thumb swiped the screen. The pressure applied was enough to bruise Threx's exoskeleton, yet the human possessed the fine motor control to navigate the interface without crushing the device. Class 12, the human read from the screen, scrolling through Threx's notes. Is that what you call Earth? It is a classification reserved for planetary anomalies, Threx explained, his scientific curiosity momentarily overriding his terror. Planets where the environmental hostility index exceeds 90%. Unstable tectonics, erratic solar radiation, predatory microbiomes, hypervariable weather patterns. By all models of galactic evolution, sentient life should not emerge from a Class 12. The energy required just to survive leaves no caloric surplus for brain development. The human looked up, a strange expression on its face. We ate the things that tried to eat us, that's how we got the surplus. Threx felt a wave of nausea. It was the fundamental horror of the human condition. The council species had evolved on garden worlds, nurturing environments where cooperation and symbiosis were the paths to sentience. Humans had evolved in a gladiatorial arena. They were the result of a billion-year biological arms race, and the bacteria. Threx pointed a trembling claw at the human's exposed neck. My scanners indicate you are a symbiotic colony. You carry more bacterial cells in your gut than there are stars in this sector. If you were to sneeze, the pathogen load would trigger a station-wide sterilization protocol. The human grinned. The sight of the teeth was still visceral, primitive. We call it an immune system, Doc. If it doesn't kill us, it makes us stronger. And if it tries to kill us, we usually nuke it with antibiotics or heat. The human dropped the datapad onto the desk. Clack. Look, the human said, the tone shifting from amused to serious. The playfulness vanished, replaced by a cold, calculating intensity that reminded Threx of the black holes used to power the warp gates. I appreciate the rescue. But I have a crew out there. The asterisk Hephaestus didn't just blow an engine. We were interdicted. Someone shot us down. Threx's blood ran cold. Interdicted, but this is council space. The Pax Galactica has held for 3,000 cycles. Yeah, well, tell that to the plasma burns on my hull, the human growled. It pushed off the desk, standing to its full height. In the low gravity, the movement caused a draft of air that carried the scent of the creature, musk, salt, ozone, and the metallic tang of adrenaline. It was the smell of a storm trapped in flesh. I need to get to the comms array, the human stated. I need to send a burst transmission to the Saltaran command, encrypted, high band. Impossible, Kix squeaked from under the table. The comms array is on the upper spire. It requires level 5 security clearance and a retinal scan from a council species. You are a biohazard. You cannot roam the station. The human looked at the heavy durasteel door that led to the corridor. It was reinforced, designed to stop hull breaches. Level 5 security, the human mused. It walked over to the door. Please, Threx begged, realizing what was about to happen. That door is maglocked with a tensor field. It is rated to withstand a kinetic impact of. The human didn't strike the door. It didn't try to force the lock. Instead, the human jammed its fingers into the small gap between the sliding panels, a gap less than 3 millimeters wide. The skin on the human's fingertips didn't tear, the bones didn't shatter. Physics work differently where I'm from, the human grunted. Threx watched the biomonitors on the wall. The human's heart rate didn't even rise. It simply engaged its posterior chain, the massive gluteal and spinal muscles firing in a sequence of devastating power. SCRECH. The sound was agonizing. Metal shrieked as it was deformed. The tensor field whined, its energy coils overloading as they tried to counteract the impossible torque being applied to the physical mechanism. The human wasn't overpowering the lock, it was overpowering the asterisk material stricture of the door frame itself. With a final tearing crunch, the durasteel panels groaned and slid apart, the locking mechanism sheared clean off. The human dusted its hands, particles of pulverized metal falling to the floor. After you, Doc, the human said, gesturing to the open hallway with a terrifyingly polite nod. Show me the way to the spire, and maybe get me a coffee, black, with enough caffeine to kill a horse. Threx looked at the ruined door, then at the monster that had opened it like a bag of nutrient paste. He realized then that the Class 12 designation was wrong. Earth wasn't a death world, it was a forge, and the galaxy had just let one of its weapons loose. Right this way, Threx whispered, floating out of his chair. Please, don't eat me. Kix's three-fingered manipulator claw hovered over the release sequence, trembling with a frequency that blurred its edges. The Vraxian technician was hyperventilating, his thoracic spiracles fluttering rapidly as he inhaled the sterile, recycled air of the observation deck. To him, the command was tantamount to suicide. Do it, Kix, Threx whispered, his own voice sounding distant, hollowed out by the ringing in his auditory canals. If the glass shatters explosively, the shrapnel will eviscerate us. A controlled release of the seal is our only variable. Kix keyed the sequence. The sound was not the smooth hydraulic hiss of council engineering. It was a groan, a deep metallic protest as the magnetic locks disengaged, fighting the immense internal pressure of the containment cell. The heavy blast door, a slab of durasteel 3 inches thick, began to slide sideways. It didn't just slide, it vibrated. The atmosphere inside the cell, pressurized to simulate the crushing weight of Earth's sea level, rushed out to meet the thinner, rarefied air of the observation deck. Whoosh! A sudden wind whipped through the room, sending loose data pads skittering across the floor. But it wasn't just air, it was a scent. Threx's olfactory sensors flared and he gagged. It was a primal, overwhelming stench. To a council species, it smelled like a chemical weapon. It was the scent of burning iron, concentrated saline, pheromones so aggressive they tasted like copper on the tongue, and the thick, humid rot of a jungle floor. It was the smell of a Class 12 death world. The human stepped through the breach. Without the muffling of the hyperglass, the sheer physical presence of the creature was nauseating. Threx felt the floor plates shudder. The human didn't stomp, he walked with that rolling, heel-to-toe efficiency, but his skeletal density was so high, calcified strata built to withstand gravity that would flatten a Vraxian into paste, that his mere mass warped the deck plating with every stride. Creak, snap, creak. The human, the one the manifest identified as Jackson, stopped 5 paces from the command console. Up close, the biological inefficiency was horrifying. The creature was literally radiating heat. Threx could see the air shimmering around the human's shoulders, a convective plume rising from the exposed skin of his neck. He was a walking thermal reactor, burning calories at a rate that would starve a council citizen in an hour, just to maintain a body temperature that was nearly boiling by galactic standards. That's better, Jackson said. The voice was no longer tinny through a speaker. It was a physical assault. The baritone frequencies resonated in Threx's chest cavity, vibrating his internal fluid sacs. It was a growl wrapped in language, a sound evolved to carry across savannas and through howling storms. Jackson rolled his shoulders again. The sound of his trapezius muscles sliding over each other was audible, a wet, meaty friction that made Kix whimper and retreat behind a server rack. You guys keep it chilly in here, Jackson noted, rubbing his arms. His skin was pale, mapped with blue veins that pumped superoxygenated blood, hemoglobin rich enough to be considered an explosive accelerant. What is this, 2% humidity? I'm drying out like a prune. Threx forced his mandibles to stop clicking. He was a senior xenobiologist and a diplomatic attaché. He represented the grandeur of the Galactic Council. He would not cower before a hairless ape from the Spiral Arms garbage dump. We adhere to standard environmental protocols, Threx managed, though his translator clipped the vowels in fear. Commander Jackson, please remain where you are. Security is en route. Jackson looked at Threx, then with a slowness that was more terrifying than speed, he turned his head to the side, looking at the door to the corridor. Security, Jackson repeated. The word rolled around his mouth like a piece of candy he hadn't decided to swallow yet. You mean the guys in the chitin armor, the ones with the stun batons set to mild discomfort. He turned back to Threx, his binocular eyes locking on. The pupils were small, focused, predatory. There was intelligence there, sharp and jagged. I didn't break out because I wanted to hurt you, little crabman, Jackson said, stepping closer. The heat coming off him was now uncomfortable, like standing next to an open oven. I broke out because I'm tired of being studied. I came here as an envoy, a representative of the Sol system, and for 3 days you've had me in a box, poking me with lasers and asking me to solve puzzles designed for toddlers. Jackson reached out. Threx flinched, expecting a blow. Instead, the human's thick, calloused fingers closed around the drink Threx had left on the console. It was a delicate flute of spun silica filled with nectarine ambrose. "Careful," Threx squeaked. "That glass is," crunch. The flute shattered in Jackson's grip. He hadn't squeezed it aggressively. He had simply held it with the resting muscle tension required to keep his hand closed in Earth gravity. To him, the Council standard glass was as fragile as a soap bubble. Liquid dripped down the human's hand, mixing with the dust of the pulverized glass. Jackson looked at the mess, annoyed. "Case in point," he grumbled. He wiped his hand on his gray jumpsuit, ignoring the shards of glass that should have sliced his epidermis but merely scraped against the thickened keratin of his palm. "You people build everything out of tissue paper and dreams," Jackson said, his voice dropping an octave, becoming serious. "And you treat us like wild animals because we're durable, because we don't break when the wind blows." He leaned down, bringing his face level with Threx. The diplomat could smell the human's breath, a cocktail of complex gut flora and distinct omnivorous decay. "I am not an animal," Jackson stated, enunciating every syllable. "I am a human, and humans are capable of a distinct psychological state called spite." "Do you have a translation for that, or is your culture too sensible for it?" Threx's translator lagged, searching for an equivalent. "Concept unknown. Closest match, self-destructive malice for the purpose of point proving." I believe I understand," Threx whispered. "Good," Jackson said. He straightened up, his vertebrae popping like gunfire. "Because if you don't get me a chair that can support 300 pounds, a drink that isn't served in an eggshell, and a gravity field that doesn't make me feel like I'm floating in a womb, I'm going to exercise my diplomatic immunity." He looked around the pristine, white laboratory, his eyes narrowing. "And by that," Jackson added, "I mean I'm going to start flipping tables until someone with actual authority comes down here and talks to me face to face. I don't care if it's the High Counselor himself." I walked through a blizzard of frozen ammonia on Titan to recover a lost mining probe. I have waited in a sniper hide for 6 days without moving to neutralize a warlord. I have the patience of a stone, buddy, but my patience for *disrespect* is currently measured in nanoseconds. Kix from behind the server rack let out a terrified chirp. He is secreting cortisol and massive amounts of adrenaline again. His fight-or-flight response is engaged. "Wrong," Jackson corrected, not even looking at the technician. He stared solely at Threx. "Humans have a third option. Fight, flight, or freeze *. No, we have dig in. We get stubborn, and right now I'm feeling very, very stubborn." The human crossed his arms, the massive biceps pressed against his chest, hard as riveted steel. He stood in the center of the room, an immovable object in a universe of fragile forces. "Now," Jackson said, a terrifyingly calm smile touching his lips, the baring of teeth that signaled not submission, but the anticipation of violence. "Who do I have to shout at to get a coffee around here?" The corridor beyond the ruined door was a blinding, sanitary white, illuminated by soft glow panels designed to soothe the fragile retinas of the Galactic Council's citizenry. To Threx, it was the comforting aesthetic of civilization. To the creature walking beside him, it seemed to be nothing more than a lack of cover. Threx drifted, using his manipulator tendrils to pull himself along the handrails, his preferred method of locomotion in the station's standard 0-4G environment. Kix, the invertebrate assistant, had secreted himself into the folds of Threx's medical robe, trembling so violently that Threx's sensors registered it as a mild seismic disturbance. The human, however, did not drift. Thumb, thumb, thumb. Every step was a violation of the station's acoustic parameters. The human, Commander Vance, as his biotags claimed, walked with magnetic boots deactivated, yet his gait was heavy, deliberate, and impossibly grounded. Threx watched the floor plating depress slightly under the creature's density. It wasn't just the skeletal mass. It was the density of the muscle fibers, woven like suspension cables, and the fluid weight of the high-pressure circulatory system required to pump oxygen through such a thick medium. "Doc," Vance said, his voice a low-frequency rumble that Threx felt in his gizzard rather than heard with his tympanic membranes. "You're staring, it's making the little guy in your pocket hyperventilate." "I am merely observing," Threx stammered, adjusting his translation collar. "Your locomotion is inefficient. You expend tremendous energy fighting momentum rather than flowing with it. Your internal furnace must be burning through caloric reserves at a rate that would starve a Vraxian in an hour." "Inefficient," Vance repeated, tasting the word. He kept his eyes scanning the corridor, his head swiveling on a thick, corded neck. On Earth, gravity tries to crush you flat 24/7. If you don't fight every step, you don't move. We don't flow, Doc, we march. They rounded a curve in the toroidal hallway, the viewports revealing the swirling purple nebula that the station orbited. Vance didn't look at the majesty of the cosmos. He looked at the reflection in the glass to check his six. Ahead, the corridor widened into a transit hub. And there, the diplomatic tension began. A squad of station security, 4 tall, spindly insectoid chitons and 1 shorter, plumage-heavy avian administrator, blocked the path. The chitons held stun lances, weapons designed to overload the delicate nervous systems of council species with a mild electric jolt. Halt. The avian administrator chirped, his feathers puffing up in a threat display that looked laughably like a decorative duster to human eyes. This was Administrator H. Luck. Medical Officer Threx, step away from the specimen. Biological containment protocols are in effect. That entity is to be incinerated immediately upon retrieval. Threx felt his heart stutter. Administrator, wait, this is a sentient rescuee. He claims diplomatic immunity under the... It is a Class 12 biological hazard. H. Luck screeched, his voice reaching a pitch that made Kix whimper audibly. It is carrying a microbiome capable of liquefying this station's population. Security, subdue it. Vance stopped. He didn't raise his hands. He didn't drop into a combat stance. He simply stopped moving, becoming a statue of meat and ceramic armor. Incinerated, Vance asked. The volume didn't rise, but the timbre dropped, scraping the bottom of the sonic register. It was a growl, a remnant of a species that had once frightened saber-toothed cats away from a kill. The chitons clicked their mandibles, sensing the pheromonal shift. The air around the human tasted sharp, bitter, and hot. You have 5 seconds to submit, H. Luck ordered, pointing a trembling wing finger. I'm not submitting, Vance said, his voice flat, devoid of the panic that H. Luck was used to extracting from subordinates. And I'm not going to be incinerated. I'm going to the comms spire. You can either step aside or I can walk through you. And looking at your bone structure, walking through you might be literal. Fire, H. Luck shrieked. The chitons fired. 4 arcs of blue ionic energy slammed into Vance's chest. Threx flinched, expecting the human to seize, to foam at the mouth, to collapse as his synapses fried. The stun lances were rated to incapacitate a grognak bull, a creature known for its stubbornness on low-gravity agricultural worlds. The arcs hit the human's flight suit, dancing over the synthetic fabric and grounding out against his skin. Vance blinked. He looked down at his chest, where a small wisp of smoke curled from a singed zipper. Then he looked back up at the chitons. He rolled his neck, a sickening asterisk pop crack echoing in the silent hub. That tickled, Vance said. It wasn't bravado. Threx realized with horrified fascination that the human's nervous system was insulated by layers of myelin sheathing so thick that the Council's standard voltage couldn't even bridge the synaptic gaps. The human was a biological Faraday cage. Impossible, H. Luck whispered, his plumage flattening in terror. The neural disruptors, they are malfunctioning. They're working fine, Vance said, taking a step forward. The chitons scrambled back, their hard claws skittering on the polished floor. You guys are just tuned for delicate instruments. I'm a sledgehammer. Vance didn't attack. He didn't need to. He employed the most terrifying human weapon of all, persistence. He walked. The chitons formed a wall, bracing their exoskeletons against each other to hold the line. It was a maneuver that could stop a runaway cargo hover sled. Vance walked into them. It was like watching a glacier hit a wicker fence. The physics were simply unfair. The human's center of gravity was low, his mass dense, and his forward momentum generated by leg muscles that evolved to lift the weight of the entire body against a crushing gravitational constant. He didn't shove, he just occupied the space they were standing in. One chiton was gently but inexorably displaced to the left, its claws screeching uselessly against the floor as it tried to hold ground. Another was simply lifted, hooked by the human's elbow, and set aside like a piece of furniture. Excuse me, Vance muttered as he passed through the blockade. Pardon me. Oh, just gonna squeeze past you there. The sheer casualness of the physical dominance was more terrifying than violence. Violence implied effort. Violence implied that the outcome was in doubt. This was just walking. Administrator H. Luck stood alone in Vance's path now. The avian was vibrating, his hollow bones rattling. He looked up at the towering primate, seeing the binocular vision, the predator's forward-facing eyes, the scars that mapped a history of trauma that would have killed a dozen council citizens. You are violating Galactic Law 77 Beta. H. Luck squeaked, clutching his datapad like a shield. You cannot pass. I represent the authority of the High Council. Vance stopped inches from the avian. He leaned down. The smell of him washed over H-Luck, the scent of hot iron, salt, and ancient, dusty earth. Administrator, Vance said, and for the first time he looked tired, not physically exhausted, but spiritually weary of obstacles. My ship was shot down. My friends are dead or dying in the dark. I have an adrenaline concentration in my blood right now that would stop your heart if you got a whiff of it. Do not quote the rulebook to me. Vance reached out. H-Luck flinched, expecting death. Instead, Vance's large, calloused hand gently took the datapad from the administrator's grasp. The human tapped the screen with a thumb thick enough to crush a windpipe. Map, Vance said, glancing at it. Top of the spire, thanks. He handed the datapad back to the frozen avian, then stepped around him. Come on, Doc, Vance called back over his shoulder, resuming his rhythmic, thunderous march. We're burning daylight, or starlight, whatever. Threx floated past the stunned security team. He looked at the chitons, who were checking their limbs for fractures simply from having touched the human. He looked at H-Luck, who was hyperventilating into his own plumage. I apologize, Threx whispered to the administrator. He is evolved differently. That is not a life form, H-Luck whispered back, staring at the retreating back of the human. That is a natural disaster. Threx hurried to catch up. He had to. For the first time in his life, he felt that being near the most dangerous thing on the station was actually the safest place to be. Commander, Threx said, gliding up beside Vance's shoulder. That was diplomatically risky. That was restraint, Vance grunted, his eyes fixed on the turbolift doors ahead. Now about that coffee. Does this station have an industrial chemical synthesizer? Because I'm going to need you to mix up a stimulant compound. If I don't get some caffeine in my system soon, the withdrawal headache is going to make me cranky, and you really don't want to see me cranky. Threx shuddered. I will synthesize it immediately. Please just keep walking. Always do, Doc, Vance said. Always do. Threx drifted past the ruined threshold, his primary optical nodes widening in a physiological response to pure, unfiltered stress. His species, the Vaxillian, were avian analogues, evolved on the high-spire arboreal cliffs of a world where gravity was a gentle caress, a mere 0.6 of the galactic standard. They were built of hollow struts and gas-filled sacks designed to glide on thermals. To Threx, the human was not a biological entity. It was a monolith of calcium and dense hydrocarbons that had somehow learned to walk. Don't worry, Doc, the human said, stepping into the pristine alabaster corridor of the med sector. I'm omnivorous, but I prefer my protein cooked, and you look a little. The human eyed Threx's shimmering, iridescent plumage. Gamey. The human took a step, thud. The sound was heavy, a dull impact that vibrated through the floor plates and traveled up Threx's thin skeletal structure. The station's artificial gravity was set to a comfortable council standard, meant to accommodate species who evolved in eternal springs and stable orbits. But the human moved with a dense, predatory gravity of its own. Threx watched, horrified, as the floor material, a memory foam composite designed to be gentle on sensitive pseudopods, compressed violently under the human's boot. The material didn't just depress, it stayed crushed for a full 3 seconds before slowly, painfully rebounding, leaving a ghost imprint of the heavy tread. Your gravity is low, the human commented, rolling its shoulders. The movement caused the heavy trapezius muscles to bunch and coil like snakes beneath the flight suit. Feels like I'm walking on the moon. Might have trouble with bone decalcification if I stay here too long. I'll need to find a gym with a centrifuge. Decalcification, Threx whispered, the translator chip in his auditory canal struggling to parse the casual nature of the threat. You sequester heavy metals in your skeletal structure to combat the crushing weight of your homeworld. Calcium phosphate mostly, some magnesium, it keeps us upright. Threx felt a wave of nausea. To a Vaxillian, calcium was a trace nutrient, carefully rationed. To this creature, it was structural armor. This human was walking around with a skeleton that weighed more than Threx's entire extended family. They continued down the corridor. The station was waking up to the morning cycle. The lighting was shifting from the soft amber of sleep mode to the stark white of duty cycle. As they walked, Threx noticed the atmospheric disturbance. The environmental scrubbers in the hallway were humming louder than usual. You are running hot, Threx observed, checking his wrist comp. The thermal imaging showed the human glowing like an uncontrolled reactor core. Your internal temperature is nearly 310 Kelvin. You are radiating waste heat at an alarming rate. Are you ill? The human laughed. It was a barking, percussive sound that echoed too loudly in the confined space. Homeostasis, Doc, we burn hot, high metabolism, keeps the muscles primed and the brain firing. On Earth, if you don't generate your own heat, the nights will kill you, or the winters, or the rain. Threx's mind reeled back to the xenobiology texts regarding Class 12 Deathworlds. Planetary axial tilt, that was the killer. Garden worlds, the cradles of council civilization, were almost always perpendicular to their orbital plane. Eternal mild summers at the equator, habitable zones extending to the poles. Weather was predictable. Evolution was a slow, polite dialogue between organism and environment. But Earth was a chaotic, tumbling rock with a 23.5-degree tilt. It swung wildly between freezing darkness and scorching radiation. Its atmosphere was a turbulent engine of hurricanes and blizzards. The being walking beside him wasn't just an animal, it was an adaptational response to planetary bipolar disorder. Here, the human said, stopping at a junction. Which way to the spire? Left, Threx squeaked, through the atrium of contemplation. They turned left, the human's movements were deceptive. Because of the low gravity, it looked like it was moving in slow motion, almost lethargic, but Threx saw the micro-adjustments. When the human turned, its boots gripped the floor with friction that would tear a Vaxillian's tendons. The creature's vestibular system, the inner ear gyroscopes, were locked onto the horizon with absolute biological certainty. They entered the atrium. It was a beautiful space, a large domed area filled with bioluminescent flora from a dozen garden worlds. A fountain of liquid methane bubbled in the center, contained within a stasis field for the aesthetic pleasure of the methane breathers. Several other species were present, a group of gelatinous Uit dwellers floating in a tank, and two tall, slender diplomatic attaches from the High Council. The diplomats froze. The human stopped. It took a deep breath through its nose. Smells like lavender and rotting eggs, the human noted. Nice plant. The diplomats, tall beings with translucent skin and large black eyes, shrank back against the wall. They had no idea what a human was. Earth was a myth, a warning story told to hatchlings, but their instincts screamed at them. They were reacting to the asterisk predator aura asterisk. Threx realized with a jolt that the human was subconsciously scanning the room. Its eyes, binocular and forward-facing, didn't just look, they targeted. The pupils dilated and contracted rapidly, adjusting to the light, dissecting the geometry of the room, identifying exits, identifying cover, identifying threats. About that coffee, the human said, ignoring the terrified diplomats and turning to Threx. My head is pounding. Cryosleep always gives me a migraine. Threx tapped his datapad with a trembling claw. I can access the synthesizer, but you asked for caffeine. That is a Class A restricted neurotoxin. It is used in chemical warfare to overstimulate the nervous systems of insectoid species until their hearts explode. Yeah, that's the stuff, the human said, a strange, predatory smile stretching its lips. Make it a double, and put some sugar in it, high-density carbohydrates. Threx approached a wall-mounted synthesizer. He had to override 3 safety protocols just to dispense the liquid. The machine whirred, synthesizing the complex alkaloid poison. A cup materialized, steam rose from it. The scent was acrid, bitter, and sharp, the smell of a forest fire in a cup. The human took it. The ceramic cup looked fragile in those thick, scarred fingers. Hot, the human murmured. It brought the cup to its lips and took a long swallow. Threx flinched, waiting for the creature to seize and die. The temperature of the liquid alone should have blistered the mucous membranes of its throat. The toxin load was enough to kill a grox beast. The human swallowed. It sighed, a long exhale of contentment. Oh God, the human groaned, the tension in its shoulders dropping an inch. That hits the spot, it's swill, but it's hot swill. The human's eyes seemed to brighten. The chemical stimulant hit the bloodstream, and Threx watched the bite readings on his scanner spike. The heart rate increased. The pupils sharpened further. The creature was accelerating its own biology. You ingest toxins to increase your combat efficiency, Threx realized, his voice hollow. You poison yourselves to think faster. We call it waking up, Doc. The human crushed the empty paper cup in one hand, wadding it into a dense ball of trash. Now, the spire. I have a feeling your security forces are going to realize I turned their expensive door into a pretzel any second now. As if on cue, a klaxon began to wail. It was a soft, melodious chime, designed not to induce panic, but to gently alert the station to an anomaly. Alert, biological containment breach in Sector 4. Level 5 biohazard detected. That's our cue, the human said. The lethargy vanished. Suddenly, the slow movement was gone. The human moved with a burst of kinetic energy that defied the low gravity. It didn't run, it launched. Grab on, the human barked. Before Threx could process the command, a hand the size of a shovel clamped onto the back of his flight harness. We're going for a ride, the human sprinted. To Threx, it felt like being strapped to a rocket. The human's stride was massive, eating up meters of the corridor in single bounds. The sheer force of the human's feet striking the floor sent shockwaves through the deck plates. Thump crack. Thump crack, they were moving at nearly 40 kilometers per hour. In the confined hallway, it was insanity. Incoming, the human roared. Ahead, a squad of security drones hovered into view. They were spheres of polished chrome, armed with stun batons and containment nets. Halt, the lead drone chirped. You are in violation of. The human didn't stop, it didn't slow down, it didn't even draw a weapon. The human simply lowered its shoulder. Physics, Doc, the human yelled, a manic laugh bubbling up from its chest. Mass times acceleration. The human collided with the lead drone. There was no contest. The drone was designed to subdue lightweight, fragile species. It was made of plastic and light alloys. The human was 100 kilograms of dense muscle and calcium, moving at sprint speed. Crunch. The drone disintegrated. Metal and plastic shattered as if the human had run through a cloud of smoke. The impact didn't even slow the human down. It simply plowed through the debris, the kinetic energy of the collision absorbed by the dense, fluid-filled shock absorbers of the human's spinal discs. Threx, dangling from the human's grip, squeezed his eyes shut and prayed to the great roost. This wasn't a species. This was a natural disaster wrapped in skin. And as the wind whipped past his auditory canals, Threx realized with terrified clarity that the human was enjoying this. The adrenaline, the violence, the speed, it wasn't stressful to the human, it was home. Threx's faceted eyes twitched, the individual lenses struggling to process the sheer biological density of the creature standing before him. The translation of the word coffee sat in his neural buffer, flashing a crimson warning that usually accompanied alerts for hull breaches or atmospheric scrubbers failing in the presence of chlorine gas. Query, coffee. Analysis, hot infusion of roasted seeds containing trimethylxanthine. Classification, class 4 neurotoxin, natural pesticide. Cardiac stimulant, Threx swallowed, his throat sac clicking audibly. The human wanted to ingest a liquid anxiety attack. I will attempt to interface with the nutrient synthesizer, Threx stammered, his chitinous legs clacking nervously against the pristine white floor tiles as he backed away. He moved with the jerky, staccato rhythm of a creature evolved in 0.6 GS, where inertia was a suggestion rather than a law. Jackson didn't move. He simply shifted his weight from his left leg to his right. Groan. The sound was low and sickening, the noise of high-tensile polymer complaining under unnatural stress. The floor panels of the laboratory were rated for standard council density, creatures of hollow bone and hydrostatic exoskeletons. They were not designed to support 300 pounds of hyperdense calcium phosphate, water-saturated muscle, and trace heavy metals wrapped in a skin that could deflect ionizing radiation. Every time the human moved, the station physically protested. Kix, still cowering behind the server rack, extended a sensory stalk. The technician's bioscanner was screaming so loud it was practically vibrating out of his manipulator claw. Diplomat Threx, Kix hissed, the vocalization barely audible over the hum of the ventilation. The thermal output, look at the thermal output. Threx glanced at his own wrist comp. The heat signature coming off Jackson was blinding. In the infrared spectrum, the human wasn't a biological entity, he was a walking reactor core. The chemical reactions required to maintain a body temperature of 37 degrees Celsius while standing still required a caloric burn that would starve a Nectrian in an hour. He is overheating the immediate atmosphere, Kix whispered, terrified. The ambient temperature has risen 3 degrees in the last 4 minutes. If he gets angry, he might ignite the oxygen scrubbers. Jackson, seemingly oblivious to the fact that he was a biological furnace, drummed his fingers on his bicep. The sound was like stones hitting a leather drum. Hey, Crabman, Jackson called out. His voice was a deep rumble that Threx felt in his thorax cavity more than he heard with his auditory tympanums. Machine, coffee, black, and make it hot. If it's lukewarm, I'm going to start disassembling the ceiling. Threx scrambled to the wall-mounted synthesizer. His manipulator claws trembled as he keyed in the override codes. The machine chirped a pleasant, melodic refusal. Error, requested compound EXCEDS toxicity thresholds 4 habitation zone. override. Threx squeaked, jamming his clearance key into the slot. Authorization code, diplomatic crisis Alpha 1, just make the poison. The machine word, confused by the order to produce a lethal substance, but the override held. Inside the fabricator, molecules were stripped and violently reassembled. Carbon, hydrogen, nitrogen, and oxygen were forced into the jagged, aggressive molecular shape of caffeine. A moment later, a distinct aroma began to waft through the sterile, antiseptic air of the lab. To Jackson, it smelled like a Tuesday morning. It smelled of comfort, of waking up before the sun, of diners on the side of a dusty highway in Nevada. To Threx and Kix, it smelled of chemical warfare. It was acrid, burnt, and aggressive, a scent that triggered evolutionary alarms screaming that a forest fire was consuming a patch of poisonous nightshade. The synthesizer dinged. A small, reinforced canister slid out. The machine had evidently decided that standard glassware would dissolve upon contact with the liquid. Threx picked it up with a trembling claw. The heat radiating from the cup was intense. He scuttled back to Jackson, extending his arm to its maximum length, treating the beverage like an unpinned grenade. Your suspension of toxins, Envoy Jackson. Jackson took the cup. His massive hand engulfed it entirely. He brought it to his nose, inhaled deeply, and sighed. The sound was terrifyingly similar to the hiss of a predator deflating its lungs before a strike. Then he took a sip. Threx watched, horrified, waiting for the human's heart to explode or his nervous system to short-circuit. The liquid was near boiling. It should have scalded the soft tissues of the throat, causing immediate swelling and asphyxiation. Instead, Jackson groaned in pleasure. Weak, he muttered, wiping a drop of the black sludge from his lip. But it'll do. Tastes like synthetic mud, but at least it's got a kick. You are not dying, Kix chirped, peeking his head around the server rack. Not today, little guy, Jackson said. He took another long pull of the scalding liquid. As the caffeine hit his bloodstream, blocking adenosine receptors and flooding his system with dopamine and norepinephrine, his posture shifted. The lethargy of the low-gravity environment faded slightly, replaced by a vibrating, predatory alertness. Suddenly, the heavy blast doors at the far end of the laboratory hissed. The pneumatic seals disengaged with a thud that vibrated through the floor. Jackson didn't turn around immediately. He took another sip of coffee, his back to the door. Finally, he murmured, the welcoming committee. Through the doors marched a squad of 6 council peacekeepers. They were Vraxian tall, spindly bipeds with iridescent scales and 4 arms, each wielding a shock lance. In the Galactic community, the Vraxian were considered the pinnacle of infantry combat. They were fast, agile, and their scales could deflect light laser fire. But to Jackson's eyes, they looked like praying mantises made of stained glass. The Vraxians fanned out, their movements fluid and practiced. They leveled their shock lances at Jackson's back. The weapons whined with charging capacitors, the tips glowing a menacing violet. Subdue. The lead Vraxian clicked, his voice amplified by a helmet vocoder. Target is Class 12 biological hazard. Do not engage in melee. Maximum voltage. Threx threw his claws up. Wait, don't fire. He is fragile. I mean, he is volatile. Jackson turned slowly, the movement deliberate and heavy. He held the coffee cup in one hand and lowered the other to his side. He looked at the 6 elite soldiers, then at their weapons, and finally locked eyes with the squad leader. That's a nice light show, Jackson said, his voice flat. Is that the setting for stun or tickle? The squad leader, a Vraxian named Kalzar, faltered for a microsecond. The creature before him was monstrous. The human's density was so high that he seemed to possess his own gravitational pull. The fabric of his gray jumpsuit was strained across muscles that looked like braided steel cables. But it was the eyes that froze Kalzar's multiple hearts. Human eyes were forward-facing, binocular, the eyes of a persistence hunter. They didn't scan for movement like a prey species. They locked onto a target and dissected it. Lower your beverage, Kalzar commanded, though his mandibles twitched, and lie prone on the deck. You are in violation of containment protocols. Containment, Jackson laughed. It was a dry, barking sound. You put me in a room with walls made of polycarbonate weave. On my world, we use that stuff to make shatterproof rulers for schoolchildren. I didn't break out, Sergeant. I just walked through the drywall. Jackson took a step forward. The Vraxians recoiled instinctively. It was a deep brain reaction to the sudden displacement of air. When a human moved, they didn't just move through the atmosphere, they shoved it out of the way. The sheer mass of Jackson coming toward them triggered the same biological fear response as a falling boulder. Hold fire, Calzar screeched, his composure cracking. Target is advancing, prepare nets. Nets, Jackson repeated, shaking his head. You guys really don't get it. He stopped 3 meters from the lead guard. The heat radiating from him washed over the Vraxians, carrying the scent of coffee and primal apex predator dominance. Let me give you a physics lesson, Jackson said, his voice dropping that terrifying octave again. He tapped his own chest. My skeletal structure evolved to survive a gravity well that would crush you into paste. My immune system fights off microorganisms every second that would liquefy your internal organs in an afternoon. I am not a hazard because I'm mean. I'm a hazard because I exist asterisk. He pointed a finger at Calzar's shock lance. If you shoot me with that, Jackson said calmly, one of two things will happen. One, my electrolyte-heavy sweat will conduct the charge across my skin, it'll hurt like hell, and I'll get mad. Or two, my nervous system, which is insulated by myelin sheaths designed to fire signals faster than you can blink, will absorb it, and I'll just get numb. Either way, about 2 seconds after you pull that trigger, I'm going to take that stick away from you. Jackson smiled. It was the smile of a wolf explaining the concept of dinner to a sheep. And I promise you, he whispered, you don't have the bone density to survive me taking it back. The laboratory fell into a silence so profound that the bubbling of the chemical filters in the corner sounded like a roar. Threx watched the standoff, his breath held in his chest. He realized then that the human wasn't bluffing. He wasn't posturing. He was simply stating the laws of physics as they applied to a Deathworlder. Now, Jackson said, turning his back on the armed squad as if they were nothing more than furniture, he looked at Threx. I believe I asked to speak to someone in charge, and unless Mr. Sparklefingers here is on the High Council, I'm still waiting. Jackson finished his coffee, crushed the reinforced metal canister in one hand until it became a flat disk of scrap, and tossed it onto the table. It landed with a heavy asterisk thud that echoed like a gavel striking a sounding block. Make the call, Threx, before the caffeine wears off and I get grumpy. The turbolift doors slid shut with a pneumatic hiss that sounded entirely too fragile to contain the creature standing beside Threx. The interior of the lift was designed for standard Galactic Council physiology, sleek, pearlescent panels, soft, ambient bioluminescence, and a floor plating rated for the average mass of a Citan diplomat. As Vance shifted his weight, settling into a leaning posture against the back wall, the floor groaned. It was a low, metallic complaint, the sound of structural polymers being pushed to their absolute yielding point. Threx floated near the control panel, keeping a respectful distance. He watched the digital readout of the lift's load sensor. It was flashing amber. One passenger, the sensor logic was confusedly calculating. Mass equivalent 4, error, recalculating. Floor's a bit spongy, Vance murmured, crossing his arms. The movement caused the heavy fabric of his flight suit to rasp, a sound like sandpaper over raw nerves. We utilize harmonic dampening composites, Threx explained, his voice trembling slightly as he adjusted his buoyancy bladders to hover higher, instinctively seeking the safety of altitude. They are designed to cushion the delicate skeletal structures of the High Council. We are not designed for density, Vance grunted. It was a sound that originated deep in a chest cavity shielded by ribs that could likely deflect small arms fire. He closed his eyes, his head tipping back against the wall. Threx took the opportunity to study the human. Up close in the sterile light of the lift, the biology of a Class 12 Deathworlder was a tapestry of horrors. Threx was a xenobiologist, he had studied the theory, but the reality was visceral. He looked at the skin on Vance's neck. It wasn't a smooth, uniform membrane like a cephalopod or the hard chitin of the security guards. It was a rugged landscape of microabrasions, pores, and follicles. It constantly shed dead cells and renewed them at a metabolic rate that burned enough calories to power a small colony. And the heat, standing 3 feet away, Threx could feel the thermal radiation pouring off the human. Vance was a biological furnace. To survive on a world like Earth, where temperatures fluctuated by 50 degrees in a single rotation, where water fell from the sky in freezing torrents, the human body had to run hot, dangerously hot. If Threx were to touch Vance's bare skin, the temperature differential alone might cause thermal shock to his own epidermis. The synthesizer Doc, Vance said, his eyes still closed. He hadn't moved, yet he knew Threx was staring. The predatory spatial awareness was always active. Right, yes, immediately. Threx fumbled with the portable medical fabricator strapped to his thorax. It was a miracle of miniaturized engineering, capable of synthesizing antidotes, vaccines, and nutrient pastes for over 2,000 known species. Chemical composition, Threx asked, readying the interface with a trembling manipulator claw. 1,3,7-trimethylxanthine, Vance recited. Dissolved in H2O near boiling, don't bother with sugar or creamers, I need the raw stuff, black, Threx keyed in the molecular structure. The fabricator's logic core processed the request for a microsecond before flashing a crimson warning hologram that filled the space between them. Warning, Class A neurotoxin detected. Asterisk restricted substance. Asterisk effects, cardiac arrest, synaptic overload, massive internal hemorrhage. Lethal dosage 4 standard LIFEF4MS 0, 5 GRAMS. Commander, Threx squeaked, his primary eyes widening. The machine refuses this compound. It is a potent pesticide found in the defense mechanisms of Class 9 toxic flora. It is a nerve agent. Vance opened one eye. The iris was a piercing, unnatural blue, contracting instantly in the light. Override it. Code Omega-0 null. Threx hesitated, then inputted the override. The machine whirred, unhappy about violating its core safety protocols. It began to construct the liquid, pulling hydrogen and oxygen from the air recycler and rearranging carbon atoms. You ingest this, purely for the stimulating effect, Threx asked, watching the nozzle dispense a steaming, opaque black liquid into a collapsible reinforced cup. My planet spins fast, Doc, Vance said, his voice dropping into a register that vibrated in Threx's hollow bones. Gravity is 98 meters per second squared. The air pressure at sea level is 101 kilopascals. Our atmosphere is 21% oxygen, a gas that corrodes iron and fuels firestorms. We evolved to run down prey until their hearts exploded from exhaustion. We don't just survive stress, we require it. The fabricator chimed. The cup was full. Steam curled off the surface of the liquid. The smell hit Threx instantly, acrid, burnt, earthy, and chemically aggressive. It smelled like a forest fire contained in a cup. Vance reached out. His hand, a manipulator encompassing 27 distinct bones and capable of crushing a throat or threading a needle, wrapped around the cup. He didn't wait for it to cool. Threx watched in horrified fascination as Vance brought the boiling liquid to his lips. The temperature of that water was near 100 degrees Celsius. It should have blistered the mucous membranes instantly. It should have caused the throat to swell shut. Vance took a long, slow swallow. He didn't even flinch. The human exhaled, a sound of profound chemical relief. That's the stuff, Vance whispered. Threx watched the physiological reaction in real time. It was like watching a reactor come online. Vance's posture changed. The slouch vanished. The spinal column, a stack of calcified discs designed to support weight against a crushing gravity well, straightened with a series of audible cracks. Asterisk. The muscles in his neck, thick cables of fiber, tightened. His pupils dilated, taking in more light, processing visual data at a higher frame rate. The exhaustion didn't leave his face, but it was pushed back, locked away behind a wall of chemically induced focus. You are metabolizing a lethal neurotoxin, Threx whispered, checking his scanner. Your heart rate, it's not becoming erratic, it's synchronizing. Caffeine isn't a toxin to us, Doc, it's an ignition key, Vance said. He took another sip, the dark liquid staining his lip. On Earth, everything is trying to kill you. The microbes, the weather, the gravity, the fauna, even the sun is trying to irradiate you. You have to be faster, harder, and more awake than the thing hunting you. This, he gestured with the cup, this just tells the adrenal glands to stand by for heavy traffic. The turbolift slowed, the inertial dampeners struggling to compensate for the sudden deceleration of Vance's mass. We're at the top, Vance said. He looked at the door, his expression hardening. The tired crash survivor was gone. In his place was the apex predator of the Orion arm, fueled by a drug that would kill a heavy worlder rhino beast. Doc, Vance said, his voice crisp now, devoid of the earlier fatigue. Stay behind me. If they have kinetic barriers, I'm going to walk through them. If they have energy weapons, I'm going to make them regret it. The caffeine is hitting the bloodstream now. He rolled his neck, the sound like a pistol shot in the confined space, and I'm feeling chatty. The doors hissed open. Before them lay the command deck of the Spire. It was a vast, tiered rotunda of glass and chrome, staffed by 36 officers of various species. As the doors parted, every head turned. Silence swept across the room like a cold wind. They saw the human. They saw the scars, they saw the steam rising from the cup in his hand, and the predatory stillness of his stance. Vance took a step out of the lift. His boot struck the command deck floor with a heavy, rhythmic asterisk thud that vibrated through the deck plates, felt by everyone in the room. Administrator H. Luck said I couldn't come up here, Vance announced, his voice projecting across the massive room without the aid of a microphone, powered by lungs evolved to scream over howling typhoons. He took a sip of his poison, his eyes scanning the room, marking targets, calculating distances, assessing threats. I'm here to file a complaint about the parking. The shower of sparks from the disintegrated drone had not yet hit the floor before the human, Captain Vance Threx's memory supplied the designation from the dossier, though his mind screamed monster was already past the debris field. Threx, an avian analog of the Cathar lineage, weighed barely 30 standard kilograms. His bones were hollow tubes of silicate-reinforced lattice, evolved for gliding in the dense, gentle atmosphere of a Class 3 garden world. To him, the universe was a place of soft currents and updrafts. Currently, he was being subjected to G-forces usually reserved for atmospheric re-entry. Vance did not run like a sapient being. Sapients, in the eyes of the Galactic Council, moved with grace. They utilized anti-grav assist belts, they flowed. Vance ran like a terrestrial landslide. Every time one of those massive, slab-like feet struck the deck, Threx felt the impact vibrate through the human's spine, down his arm, and into Threx's own fragile sternum. Crack, crack, crack. The floor tiles of the corridor, composite ceramics rated for standard pedestrian traffic, were failing. They were spiderwebbing under the sheer, concentrated point load of the human's mass multiplied by his velocity. Vance was literally kicking the station apart with every stride, digging his heels in to find traction where none existed for a creature of his density. Traction control is garbage on this deck. Vance shouted over the roar of wind rushing past Threx's auricular cavities. The human drifted sideways around a corner, his boots screeching against the metal subflooring as the ceramic tiles disintegrated into powder. He banked off the bulkhead, using his shoulder as a pivot. Wham! The metal wall dented, a 3-inch depression appeared in the titanium alloy paneling. Vance didn't even grunt, he simply used the rebound to correct his vector and kept sprinting. Threx's medical scanner, still clutched in his trembling claw, was screaming a litany of impossible data. Subject core temperature, 39 degrees C and rising. Subject heart rate, 160 BPM. Surface thermal radiation, critical. You are overheating, Threx shrieked, the wind whipping his feathers into a frenzy. Your coolant system is failing, you are radiating heat like a reactor leak. Just warming up, Doc, Vance roared. The smell hit Threx then. It was a thick primal musk rolling off the human in waves. It smelled of saline, ammonia, and complex pheromones. Sweat, the Deathworlder cooling mechanism. Threx had read about it in exobiology textbooks, the horrific concept of a creature exuding liquid onto its own skin to utilize evaporative cooling. In the confined air of the corridor, the humidity spiked instantly. To Threx, it smelled like violence. They burst into the Sector 4 arterial junction. This was a wide, vaulted promenade designed for commerce and leisure, lined with shops selling delicate crystalline sculptures and zero-G fluid art. Now it was a kill zone. Contact front, Vance barked. At the far end of the promenade, 50 meters away, a heavy containment unit had deployed. These were not the flimsy police drones from the hallway. This was a quadrupedal mech, 4 meters tall, armed with suppression cannons and a kinetic barrier projector. It was designed to quell riots among the Grox beasts or subdue rogue mining equipment, its optical sensors locked onto them. The suppression cannon spun up with a high-pitched whine. Target acquired, the mech boomed, its voice vibrating the floor plates. Class 5 biological threat, engage. Class 5, Vance scoffed, not slowing down. That's insulting, I'm at least an 11 on a bad day. Stop. Threx wailed, trying to unclip his harness, trying to escape the suicide trajectory. That is a siege unit. It has a kinetic shield. You cannot punch physics. Doc, listen to me, Vance said, his voice dropping an octave, becoming eerily calm amidst the chaos. Tuck your head. Cover your ears, open your mouth to equalize pressure. Why? Because I'm gonna throw something. Vance skidded to a halt, the friction burning black streaks into the pristine white deck. He didn't stop to seek cover. Instead, he pivoted toward a decorative installation in the center of the promenade. A solid block of decorative obsidian analog, carved into the likeness of the first counselor. It was a meter cubed. It must have weighed 400 kilograms. To a council species, it was a permanent fixture. It would require a gravlift to move. Vance grabbed it. Threx watched, mesmerized by the biological impossibility unfolding before him. The human squat-walked into the lift, his massive thighs thick as Threx's torso, swelling as the fabric of his cargo pants strained to the tearing point. HRRRNGH. The sound that tore from Vance's throat was animalistic. It was the sound of a predator challenging gravity to a duel. The muscles in the human's back coiled and bunched like pythons beneath his shirt. Threx's scanner showed the impossible happening. The human's skeletal structure was compressing. The intervertebral discs were squeezing out fluid to cushion the load. The bones themselves, far denser than steel-reinforced concrete, were flexing microscopically. The statue tore free from the floor bolts with a screech of tortured metal that made Threx's teeth ache. Vance spun. He didn't just lift it, he became a rotational engine. He used the generated torque of his heavy core, spinning once, twice, a technique dating back to the ancient mud pits of Earth's pre-atomic history. The hammer throw, catch, Vance roared. He released the stone. The 400-kilogram block of rock flew through the air. It was not a graceful arc, it was a flat trajectory of pure malice. The mech's threat assessment algorithms failed. They were programmed to calculate incoming plasma fire or slow-moving projectiles. They were not programmed to calculate a boulder being hurled at 60 meters per second by a biological entity. The stone smashed into the kinetic barrier. The barrier flickered, overloaded by the sheer mass energy transfer, and collapsed. The stone continued, burying itself in the center of the mech's chassis. Crunch, boom. The mech folded in on itself, sparks showering the promenade as the statue crushed its central processor and power core. Vance was already moving again before the mech hit the ground. He scooped Threx up, who had fallen to the floor in a daze, and tossed him back onto his shoulder like a sack of grain. Shields down, Vance noted dryly, stepping over the twitching wreckage of the multi-million credit war machine. Let's move. Threx was hyperventilating. His air sacs were fluttering rapidly, trying to purge the excess cortisol from his system. You manipulated gravity, Threx stammered. You used a graviton assist field. Nope, Vance said, jogging toward the heavy blast doors at the end of the promenade. Just leverage, dock, and calcium. Lots of calcium. They reached the blast doors leading to the spire elevator. They were sealing. The station AI had realized the threat and was initiating a hard lockdown. The massive plasteel slabs, half a meter thick, were grinding shut, teeth interlocking. There was a gap of barely a meter left. Not today, Vance shouted. He didn't slide through. He stopped asterisk in the gap. Threx shrieked as Vance planted his feet wide and slammed his hands against the closing doors, one palm on the left slab, one on the right. Vance, no. Threx cried. The hydraulics are rated for hull integrity. They exert 50 tons of pressure. Yeah, Vance gritted his teeth, his lips pulling back to reveal white, omnivorous teeth. Well, they're gonna have to work for it. The doors shuddered. The hydraulic motors whined, a high-pitched keen of mechanical strain. They pushed against the human, and the human pushed back. Threx stared at Vance's arms. The skin was flushing a deep, alarming red. Veins, thick as cabling, popped out along his forearms and neck, pulsing with a violent, rapid rhythm. The human's eyes were bloodshot, the capillaries bursting from the internal pressure. Alert, Threx's scanner whispered. Subject muscular tension exceeding structural limits. Microfractures detected in radius and ulna. Adrenal saturation at 400%. Open the override, dock, Vance choked out. The words were strangled, forced past a diaphragm that was currently acting as a structural load-bearing wall. Threx scrambled down Vance's back, his claws skittering on the floor. He looked up. The human was a pillar of trembling agony. Sweat was literally flying off him, sizzling as it hit the floor. He was holding back the weight of a starship bulkhead with nothing but chemical rage and bone density. The doors groaned. They actually stopped moving. The human was stalling the hydraulic press. Threx scrambled to the control panel on the wall. His talons fumbled with the interface. I need a bypass code. It's encrypted. Punch it. Vance roared, a spray of saliva and blood flying from his mouth. His knees were bending. The floor beneath his boots was deforming, the metal dimpling under the pressure. I am a xenobiologist, not a soldier. You're a Deathworlder's friend. Vance groaned, his voice sounding like grinding stones. Do it. Threx looked at the panel. He looked at the human, whose nose had begun to blade, a stark crimson line against the flushed skin. The creature was dying to keep this door open for him. Something primitive awoke in Threx's hindbrain. A dormant instinct from a time before the Council, before the peace treaties, when his ancestors had been raptors in the high peaks. Threx didn't try to hack the code. He balled his fragile hand into a fist, wrapped it in his lab coat to protect his hollow bones, and struck the emergency manual release casing. The plastic cover shattered. He slammed the big red button, pneumatic hiss. The hydraulic pressure released instantly. The doors retracted. Vance collapsed forward, catching himself on his hands and knees. He gasped, sucking in air in ragged, heaving drafts. The sound was terrifying, like a bellows meant for a forge. Threx rushed to him, waving the scanner over the human's chest. Vance, ventricular strain detected. You have torn 3% of your pectoral muscle fibers. You need immediate stasis. Vance spat a glob of blood onto the pristine floor. He stayed on all fours for a moment, shaking his head like a wet dog. Then, impossibly, a low, rumbling sound emanated from his chest. Heh heh heh, he was laughing. Vance slowly pushed himself upright. He wiped the blood from his nose with the back of his hand and smeared it on his pants. He looked at his trembling hands, flexed them once, twice, until the shaking stopped. Good hit, Doc, Vance wheezed, clapping a heavy hand on Threx's shoulder. The impact nearly buckled Threx's knees, but there was a warmth in it that wasn't just thermal radiation. You broke the casing. That's vandalism. I'm proud of you. You are insane, Threx whispered, looking at the dented blast doors where Vance's palms had left shallow impressions in the plasteel. You are biologically impossible. Come on, Vance said, straightening up and cracking his neck with a sound like a pistol shot. He looked down the corridor toward the spire. We've got a universe to annoy. The silence that followed Jackson's ultimatum was not empty. It was heavy, suffocating, and tasted of copper. Threx stared at the flattened disc of alloy on the table. It was a standard-issue ration canister, composed of a trilattice durasteel composite. In the engineering manuals of the Galactic Council, that material was rated to withstand the pressure of a deep-sea submersible on a Class 4 ocean world. It was designed to resist hull breaches. It was designed to be immutable. And the human had crumpled it like it was made of wet tissue paper. Threx's manipulator limbs, usually steady enough to perform cellular surgery, trembled as he reached for the comms console. The movement felt sluggish, as if the air in the room had thickened. In a way, it had. Threx's sensory bristles picked up a spike in thermal radiation so intense it was almost visible. The human was running hot, a biological furnace burning at nearly 310 Kelvin. To a cold-blooded species like the Vraxians, or a mesmerizingly delicate species like Threx's own Xylanthe kind, Jackson wasn't just an organism. He was a walking radiological hazard. I am initiating the protocol, Threx stammered, his vocal synthesizer hitching on the translation. Good, Jackson grunted. He leaned back against the laboratory table, the reinforced steel groaning in protest under his weight. He crossed his arms over that impossible chest. And tell your boys to stop vibrating, it's annoying. Threx glanced at the security team. Kalzar, the Vraxian squad leader, had not moved. He was locked in a primal feedback loop. Vraxians were apex predators on their homeworld, a Class 3 arboreal planet. They hunted by sensing the microtremors of prey, but faced with Jackson, Kalzar's sensory organs were being overwhelmed. The human's heartbeat was so slow, so powerful that Threx could hear it thumping against the man's ribs like a pile driver. Thump, pause, thump, pause. It was the rhythm of a tectonic event, not a biological pump. Kalzar's mandibles were locked open, leaking a thin stream of stress-response pheromones that smelled sharply of ammonia and terror. The Vraxian was waiting for the human to pounce. He expected a spring-loaded attack, a blur of motion. He couldn't comprehend that the human didn't need asterisk to be fast. When you are an anvil, you don't need to be an arrow. Threx turned his primary ocular sensors to the holographic interface. His fingers danced over the hard light keys, entering the emergency override codes reserved for containment breaches of Omega-level entities. Subject, species unknown, self-designated human, origin, Sol system, planetary classification, Deathworld Category 12. The computer flagged the entry immediately. A red warning rune flashed in Threx's retina. Error, impossible classification. Maximum planetary hazard rating is 5. Threx bypassed the error with a frantic swipe. The Council's database was built on the logic of survivability. A Class 5 world was a place of high gravity up to 0. 8 galactic standard, volatile weather, or predatory megafauna. Life on a Class 5 struggled. It scraped by, but a Class 12, Threx looked back at Jackson. The human was picking a piece of lint off his jumpsuit board. A Class 12 world shouldn't support life, it should execute it. According to the deep scan telemetry the Council probe had gathered from the Sol system before being shot down, Earth was a nightmare of fluctuating temperatures that swung from freezing to boiling water. Its gravity was a crushing 9.8 meters per second squared, a force that necessitated bones made of calcium phosphate composite so dense they blocked X-rays. Its atmosphere was 21% oxygen, a highly reactive, corrosive gas that literally burned cellular material on contact. Most species in the galaxy derived energy from low-yield photosynthesis or geothermal absorption. Humans. They stripped oxygen from the air to fuel a metabolic fire that allowed them to engage in persistence hunting. Threx had read the files. They didn't just kill prey, they walked it to death. They pursued it until the prey's chemistry failed, until its muscles dissolved from lactic acid, until it simply lay down and accepted the end. And Jackson was standing there, fueled by that same oxidizing fire, waiting for a phone call. Connecting to High Counselor Vilos, the computer chimed, its automated voice seemingly oblivious to the monster in the room. Priority 1 channel established. The air in the center of the room shimmered. The sterile white light of the laboratory was cut by the azure glow of a holographic projection. Slowly, a figure resolved in the air, floating a meter above the floor. It was High Counselor Vilos. The counselor was a cephalon, a species of aquatic telepaths who required a suspended gravity tank to exist outside their homeworld. Vilos was beautiful in a fragile, ethereal way. His skin was translucent, revealing the pulsing of bioluminescent organs beneath. He possessed no bones, only cartilage and fluid pressure. A stiff breeze on Earth would likely flay him alive. Researcher Threx, Vilos' voice echoed, not from speakers, but projected directly into their minds via telepathic amplifiers. It was a voice like calm water. You have activated the Omega beacon. This signal is reserved for the potential extinction of a station. Report. Threx opened his mouth, but his throat sac was dry. How could he explain? I'm the report, a deep, gravelly voice interrupted. The hologram of Vilos rippled as the counselor turned his attention to the source of the sound. The cephalon's large, ink-black eyes widened slightly as they processed the image of Jackson. Jackson pushed himself off the table. He didn't walk, he stalked. He moved toward the hologram, and Threx watched the Vraxian guards flinch back, their chitinous armor clattering against the walls. Jackson stopped right in front of the projection, looking up at the floating alien. "You're the guy in charge?" Jackson asked. He tilted his head, his neck vertebrae cracking with a sound like a pistol shot. Vilos floated higher, an instinctual retreat. "I am High Counselor Vilos of the Galactic Federation. You are the specimen, recovered from Sector ZZ9 plural Z Alpha." "Specimen," Jackson repeated, tasting the word and finding it sour. "Is that what you call a sentient being you abducted while he was trying to enjoy a sunrise?" "You were extracted for study," Vilos said, his telepathic voice wavering with a hint of confusion. "Your vessel was detected emitting high-yield radiation. We assumed it was a weapon. When we brought you aboard, our sensors indicated your home planet is uninhabitable. We were rescuing you." Jackson laughed. It started low in his chest, a rumble that vibrated the floor plates under Threx's feet. "Rescuing me," Jackson wheezed, wiping a tear from his eye. "Oh, that's rich. You saw a planet with hurricanes, volcanoes, and gravity that could flatten a tank, and you thought, those poor things, let's save them." He took a step closer to the hologram, his face passing through the edge of the light, illuminating the scars on his jaw, scars from a bar fight in Chicago, Threx realized, or perhaps a fall from a bicycle. Minor injuries to a human, fatal trauma to a council species. "Let me clarify the taxonomy for you, Counselor," Jackson said, his voice dropping to a whisper that carried more weight than a scream. "We didn't evolve on Earth despite the conditions. We evolved because of them. We are the children of the Crucible." Jackson held up a hand. He flexed his fingers, the tendons shifting under the skin like coiled snakes. "You see this? This is a gripping tool designed to strangle things that have fangs bigger than your head. You see my skin. It's covered in a layer of dead cells and oils specifically designed to stop solar radiation and chemical burns. My gut is full of acid strong enough to dissolve zinc. We are not victims of our environment, Vilos. We are the weapon you were afraid my ship was carrying." Vilos looked at the Vraxian guards who were still cowering. The counselor's bioluminescence dimmed, a sign of extreme distress. What do you want?" Vilos asked. "I want a ship," Jackson said flatly. "I want my ship. And I want a heavy mass fabricator to fix the hyperdrive you idiots undoubtedly broke when you tractored it in." "And if we refuse?" Vilos asked, attempting to regain some diplomatic stature. You are one entity on a station of 5,000. Jackson smiled. It wasn't the wolf smile this time, it was something worse. It was the smile of an engineer who knew exactly where the structural weak point was. Threx, Jackson said without looking away from the hologram. What's the atmospheric mix on this station? Threx jumped. It is a standard council mix, 78% nitrogen, 20% inert gases, 2% oxygen. 2%, Jackson mused. That's thin. I've been feeling a bit lightheaded, like I'm at high altitude. He looked back at Vilos. You know what happens when a human doesn't get enough oxygen, counselor. Our bodies switch to anaerobic respiration. We produce adrenaline. We get desperate, but right now I'm just breathing deep. Jackson took a massive, exaggerated breath, his chest expanding to an impossible volume. He held it, then exhaled slowly. But if you don't get me my ship, Jackson said, I'm going to start running. And when I start running, I'm going to burn through the oxygen on this deck faster than your life support scrubbers can replace it. I won't kill you with my hands, Vilos. I'll just breathe all your air until your soldiers suffocate. He leaned in, his eyes hard as diamonds. So, about that ship.